Hello, welcome to A British Audiophile. For those of you who haven't watched one of my videos before, my name is Taryn. I have to say that I love doing this. I know reviewers regularly complain about the fact it's a lot of work, but it's a great deal of fun being able to have the opportunity to listen to different types of gear in your own home. And I don't really care too much whether it's expensive gear or more accessible gear. I really enjoy finding the gems out there. But there's two things that really float my boat. One is listening to gear from brands that I'm not that familiar with or not familiar with at all. And the other thing is something that is a little bit innovative, a little bit different in the way in which it's designed. Well, I'm pleased to say today we have something that ticks both of those boxes. Ophidian Audio has been around for about 10 years, but it's very much a small British manufacturer. And the design of the Mambo 2 speakers that you see behind me, well, it's not just an MTM, that's a midwoofer, a tweeter and a midwoofer that you see on the front baffle. There's an identical midwoofer concealed inside the box. The bass loading on this speaker is interesting. Well, to me at least, it's not a sealed box or a regular ported design or even a transmission line. It's actually a hybrid between a ported design and a transmission line, a technology that Ophidian refer to as Aeroflex. If you're interested, I'll get into that later in the technical insights section. But for now, let's just find out what this Ophidian Mambo 2 is about. The Ophidian Mambo 2 is a slender, compact 2.5-way floor standing speaker, measuring 893mm high, but a mere 158mm wide and 191mm deep. In old money, that's 35.2 by 6.2 by 7.5 inches. It retails for £2,000 in the UK. The real wood finish is top drawer, which it should be considering the cabinet is constructed by Timberworks of Sheffield. That's where Proac and Slender have their cabinets built. No expense spared here. The two 115mm 4.5-inch mid-woofers sandwich the tweeter and are from US manufacturer Dayton Audio. They're a paper cone coated with a polymer. There's an identical driver inside the cabinet. The 27mm, that's just over 1-inch tweeter, is from well-known Norwegian manufacturer Sias. It's a fabric coated cone with their proprietary Sonalex polymer to improve damping. To the rear you'll observe one set of 5-way speaker binding posts and the Aeroflex vent. That isn't just a standard port, but more on that coming up shortly. Before I delve into the technicalities, I just want to apologise. I haven't got some flashy pictures of the internals that I can show you. This is a very small British manufacturer and that kind of imagery just isn't available. So I'm going to keep this section as succinct as I possibly can. But there are a couple of things worth talking about. The first thing is the crossover. It uses metal oxide resistors that have a lower inductance than the sandcast resistors that you commonly find. All the capacitors are good quality polypropylene devices from well-respected manufacturer Mundorf, and it's all air core inductors with the exception of the internal woofer due to the size of the inductor required in that particular application. That's an iron core inductor. It's a 2.5-way design with the tweeter playing down to 2400 Hz before it hands over to those two mid-woofers that you see on the front baffle. They'll play down to a reported 38 Hz, but they're supplemented in the bass by that third internal driver. That operates from 200 Hz and below, and that's why it requires such a large inductor, and really an air core inductor would have to be rather large and also rather expensive, so that's why that really wasn't an option at this price. The second thing worth talking about is the Aeroflex bass loading system, which is a hybrid between a ported design and a transmission line design. So let me just briefly recap on the different types of bass loading that you typically find on box speakers. In fact, that reminds me, I did a video some time ago on different types of bass loading for speakers. What was that called? The best speakers for bass, something like that. I'll link that in the description for those of you who want a little bit more detail. The ATC SCM19s that I reviewed some time ago are an example of a seal box enclosure. These type of designs are known for their very quick transient response. The back energy created from the woofer moving in and out is used as a spring to push the driver back into position. The downside is that because the energy is trapped inside the speaker and dissipated as heat, they have lower sensitivity, and also the bass rolls off a little bit earlier, even if it does roll off a little bit more smoothly. Most speakers that you're going to come across these days are going to be a ported design of one type or the other. They don't typically have the transient response of a seal box enclosure, but because the back energy generated from the woofer moving in and out is recycled and fed through the port at the desired tuned frequency, you get a boost in sensitivity and an extension in the bass response. The PMC2521i that I reviewed is an example of a transmission line speaker. The back energy is fed down a line which needs to be long due to taking advantage of something called the quarter wave resonance. And that's why it winds up being a labyrinth with all those folds in it. The benefits of this type of design, if done correctly, is that it can approach the transient response of a good seal box enclosure, but also has that boost in sensitivity and that extension in bass that you associate with a ported design, only there's the potential there for even greater bass extension and much better control of the bass out of the output of the transmission line. Downsides are the complexity of build and the complexity of design. Just ask Oliver Thomas, the designer of the PMC2521i, how many grey hairs he inherited during that design process. Ophidian's Aeroflex system is a hybrid between a ported design and a transmission line. It's best thought of as a long ported system. It's still taking advantage of that quarter wave resonance, but without the need for that long transmission line. And this is where that third driver's position is critical. You can think of it a little bit like an electromechanical cheat. I've auditioned a lot of speakers around the 2–2.5K price range, and some very good ones, but in two critical areas of performance, which is how detailed they sound and how tonally accurate they are. And in order to judge tonal accuracy, you have to listen to an awful lot of vocals and acoustic instruments. There's no substitute for doing that. There's only one other speaker that was able to match my Proact Response 1 SCs, and that was the ATC SEM19s. Well, here we have another one. If you listen to individual notes, there's always a start, a middle and an end, what mixing engineers refer to as the attack, the body and the release. And if there's a hint of distortion in this area, those transients get softened and the decays either get veiled or curtailed. That isn't the case here. This is as clean a mid-range as I've heard around this price. It's a match for my Proact Response 1 SCs and the ATC SEM19s. That isn't to say that all three of these speakers have the same presentation in the mid-range. They don't. My Proacts have more body, they have more harmonic richness. You could argue they're a touch romanticized, which I personally enjoy. The Mambo 2s have a more tell it like it is type of presentation, which reminds me more of the ATC SEM19s. That Cias Sonolex tweeter works its magic in the upper registers. Aggressive, bright, sibilant, forget about it. But the best tweeters have a lightness of touch and ethereal quality in the highs, and that's precisely what you get with the Mambo 2. Bass lines are played super tight and nicely extended. I know it has relatively small mid woofers, but there are two of them on the front baffle and another one inside. I was expecting more bass weight, and that's why the Mambo 2 is dynamically a little bit challenged, especially at lower listening volumes. Even compared to small bookshelf speakers like my Proact Response 1 SCs, they have more weight and more rhythmic drive. Soundstage width, for that matter soundstage depth as well, is more than acceptable, and the location of instruments within the sound field is also pretty solid. If you think this is veiled criticism, you're mistaken. You're just probably picking up on a slight lack of enthusiasm on my part. And that's because my Proact Response 1 SCs have this ability to disappear and wrap you in this much bigger, much more immersive sound field. You have to tease the performance out of this speaker. It's not a place it anywhere, partner it with anything type of scenario. So let's start with positioning first. I would have the tweeters on the outside. That increases soundstage width, and I think most people will probably wind up in that scenario. But where exactly it's going to wind up in your room is going to be based on your room and your room acoustics. I can tell you where it wound up in my room. It was closer to the wall than my Proact Response 1 SCs by about 15 centimeters or 6 inches, and that augmented the bass quite nicely. And also, I've wound up with very minimal toe-in. I found that that increased soundstage width quite nicely. And normally when you do that, you compromise the central image. The location of instruments in the center becomes a little bit vague, but that isn't the case with this particular speaker. It actually works quite well with minimal toe-in. I relayed these results back to Gareth, who's the founder of Ophidian and the designer of these speakers, and I always do that before I publish my review, just in case they have some feedback that they want to share, and he actually confirmed that's pretty much where he'd have them located as well. The first amplifier hooked up was my Exposure 21 Pre and 18 Super monoblocks. That's a big, warm, lush sounding amplifier. It spotlighted what the Mambo 2s were capable of, especially in the mid-range. All that harmonic richness and nuanced timbral information that you should crave from a system around this price, it was very apparent. Partnered with my Hagel H160 just illustrated that you can have two very fine sounding components in their own right that simply just don't work together. Regular viewers of this channel will know that this generation of Hagel amplifiers, but not the current ones, have a leanness in the mid-range that, combined with the revealing mid-range of the Mambo 2s, just sounded thin and a little bit bright, dare I say even a little bit harsh at times. This wasn't a trait that's so prevalent with my ProAct Response 1SCs, because they have a harmonic richness that offsets the slight coolness of the Hagel a little bit better. Hooking up the Exposure 2510 that's currently here on long-term loan just showed that you don't need big pre-power amplifier combinations to get excellent results with the Mambo 2s. 2510 has more than enough power to drive it, it's very revealing in the mid-range, but it has that warmth in the mid-range that allows the Mambo 2s to shine. Switching to my larger exposure amplifiers, sure you get a little bit more of those characteristics, but it isn't as prevalent as it is when I switch between the two amplifiers with my ProAct Response 1SCs. Because mainly what you get from the bigger amplifiers is a greater sense of scale and dynamics, space and timing, and that isn't the strongest suit with the Mambo 2s. Another good combination was the Wilsington R8. That's a tube amplifier with a neutral tonal balance and excellent overall sonic performance. It has a muscular presentation that gives a little bit more rhythmic drive than the Exposure 2510, but both of these amplifier combinations with the Mambo 2s worked extremely well, and I think will make an awful lot of people very happy. I said right at the beginning of this video, an innovative design from a small manufacturer that I haven't heard of before really piques my interest. But Ophidian are more than a fly-by-night organisation. They've been around for 10 years. Sure, there's going to be limited availability around the world. Even in the UK, it's only available through a handful of dealers. But I'm very happy to shine a light and give some attention to a brand that produces a product that sounds as good as this. The Ophidian Mambo 2s are one of the most detailed, refined and natural sounding speakers available for around £2,000. Sure, they have a limited sense of scale and dynamics, especially at low volumes. If you listen at around 65 dBs or below, perhaps late at night close up to your speakers, you may want to pass these over. But if you don't, if you listen at moderate levels, let's say from 65 to around 80 dBs in a small and medium sized room, then these speakers definitely should be checked out. They come highly recommended. Well, that's it for me. All that remains for me to say is if you like this video, please hit that like button, please share it. If you like what I'm doing with this channel and you haven't subscribed already, you may want to consider subscribing. And do check me out on Patreon, where I have some exclusive content as well as some consultancy services that I offer. But for today, for now, a British Audiophile signing off.